salary, I was making $150 a week on the road. Now, today that sounds like nothing, playing on a name band, but that's what you made, $150 a week. Lead trumpet player got 180. You know, drummers sometimes got 180, 200 a week. That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
But staying loaded, it isn't a thing where you did it. I mean, the jazz bands like Ellington's band was loaded all the time. You know, Basie's band, all those guys did. We all did. You know, Paul Gonzalez, we smoked and laughed about it. Paul Gonzalez was an addict. He was a sick man. He used to sit in the bandstand, literally out of his skull, eyes closed. But son of a bitch, you know, when he came, he got up and played. When he stood up, no matter how loaded he was, he could play. And I guess he came into the Kings and Queens, you say? Yeah, see, I wasn't playing there then.
Yeah, Bob was there that night.
Yeah, and what did he say, he couldn't play?
No, I say he played fine.
He played fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Came in the back door in a raging snowstorm and said, "Can I sit in?" And they looked and said, "Sure." You know?
Wow. Yeah, I don't remember it. See, I don't know where I was at that time.
Because he grew up in Pawtucket, actually.
He grew up in Pawtucket, right. And he knew my father. But when I sat in, let's see, when we played opposite the band, he was with the band at the Celebrity Club. It was Johnny Hodges and Paul Gonzalez. And they were loaded. I mean, the whole section. Stoned all the time. Cat Anderson was on trumpet. My God, he was phenomenal. It was unbelievable. But
was Ray Nance in the band at that time?
yeah, he played trumpet and violin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was a great violin.
yeah. Bovies, yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
certainly that was
Yeah.
for a long period of your career was where you were every week.
Well, okay. I mean, I can segue into Bovies in a sense. Coming off the road, we talked about that. Getting married, it became a question of now I got to work to right. Oh, I got to change my focus. I'm talking up that way. Okay.
It's okay.
But when I got married, I was playing 6 or 7 nights a week. In fact, I was working with that group right there, Bob Pederuti, Ronnie Brown, and myself. And Carol Sloan, who was Carol Van at the time, was singing with us. Do you know who she is?
Yeah, sure.
Great singer.
Yeah, really great.
She's a real jazz singer, you know, in the true sense of the word. The only jazz singer in Rhode Island, except for the only one that comes close, and I worked with her, she's wonderful, is, I'll think of her name anyway. She's singing today, but I worked with her not too long ago. Anyway, what the hell was I saying? I'm 75, guys. Come on, give me a break, will
You're
you?
doing great. You're talking about playing it.
Yeah, I'm playing 6 or 7 nights a week, but I know I got to get a day job, you know, because now it's the 60s. Rock and roll is so strong. You know, everybody's flipping over the Beatles, and I'm still listening to Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. You know, what's the matter with this picture? This is not music. You know, this is like ABC. You know, I went from MIT to ABC, you know, music-wise. How can I play this crap, you know? Anyway, but, you realize that what you're doing is fading out and something else is coming in. So, in fact, when I was getting back to Tex Beneke, we started to play down south, and the week before, the week after, Elvis Presley was going to play in the same club. And these people in these clubs are looking at us as if to say, what are you playing? We like Elvis Presley now. You know, and Tex Beneke, we started to realize that. And he disbanded right after, I don't know, I guess it was late 53, 56, 55, 56. By the end of 56, he disbanded. He gave up, went home. Anyway, you realize the music is changing. You got to do something else.
Mm.
So I started to work days, but still liking the type of music like big band jazz. I went to New York and listened to Thad Jones, Mel Lewis at the Village Vanguard. And I heard my wife and I took a trip to New York. We first stopped naturally. Well, I went and see Zooty Ziggleton at Jimmy Ryan's, my favorite. You know, get that out of the way. Then we went to Village Vanguard down the village, and I'm sitting there. It's a Monday night, and Thad Jones. I mean, talk about separating the men from the boys. This is a band.
Yeah.
I flipped out. I said, "Oh shit, man!" I said, "You know, this is what we've got to play." I said, and I talked to some of the guys in the band that I happen to know, and they told me the union let them institute a $25 scale for Monday nights only, for jazz only, no dancing. Okay? I says, we can do this in Providence. Come back home, and I called up Renzi, Pelosi, and a few of the other guys. I think George Massa was one of them also. I said, I'm going to try to start a big band on that style of thing, and I'm going to talk to the union and see if they'll let me do it legitimately, and we get $25 a piece. And you know, I went through that routine. I was working at the Cobblestone Tavern in East Providence. Howie Fink owned it. Terrific guy. I was there with a Dixieland band. We were playing banjo, trumpet, trombone, playing Louis Armstrong style music on weekends. I guess around 3 nights a week. And I said to the club owner, I said, would you be interested in a big band on a Monday night? I'm going to start rehearsing pretty soon. And he said, what's a big band? He didn't know what the hell a big band was. I was having a rehearsal at the Club Rendezvous, which they just tore down. It's on the corner of in Cranston, Plainfield. Used to be a club there anyway. It's a gas station now. Anyway, the guy come up to the club on a Monday or Tuesday night. We had a rehearsal. He loved it because I called the guys and we started rehearsing. I had about 10 shots maybe. And he said, let's try it. Monday night, I says, all you got to pay us is $25 a piece. You know, for 15 guys, whatever that comes to, you know. He said, what the hell, I'll pay that for a 5-piece band, 6-piece band. I said, I'll take a shot, you know. So we started there on a Monday night. I guess this was 1967. Yeah, late 67, something like that. And it went over well. People loved it. We jammed the place. But then Howie comes up to me, he says, my father is selling all this property. It's waterfront. It's a junkyard. Right on the shores there where the Red Bridge used to be. If you look over, there's an old bridge there. It's the new bridge is right next to it, going to East Providence. It was right on the water. It was all a junkyard and scrap metal and stuff. But there was a big warehouse he turned into a club, and that's where we were playing, the Cobblestone Tavern. I guess we were there almost a year, Monday nights. And he says, I'm going to have to give up the joint. So I went to Bovey. And he knew me, I knew him. I played there before. Told him what I was doing. He knew what we were doing because he heard about it. It's right in East Providence. He said, let's give it a shot. And the rest is history. You know, we played there every Monday night for 30 years. The beginning was Mike Renzi was on piano, Hal Crook on trombone, Dick Johnson, Lou Colombo, Art Pelosi, Eddie Zareski, Bob Peteruti on bass, Nick Cavus, you didn't know him, he just died. That was the meat of the band, really. Yeah, and you know.
So when you left the Cobblestone and went to Bovey's, did you skip a beat? It was just from one place to the other?
Oh no, we didn't miss. We had we played the Cobblestone. I think we did a few weeks at the Senator Carney's. There was a club on South Main Street, and then we went right into Bovey's. No, we didn't miss any. Well, there may have been a week or two. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but.
And you brought the crowd with you?
Yeah.
Same folks?
Yep. Yeah, it worked out. It was unbelievable. We played. It was a 4-hour job from 9 to 1, and it got to the point where at 8:30 you couldn't get in the place. I'm setting up and the place is packed for years on end. It was like that. It was unbelievable. And I was working days. I had to work.
What were you doing?
Well, I started to work. My father had about that time gave up the Arcadia, shut down the lease. The letter of people, two brothers, they both died, and it wound up being in the hands of the attorneys. And he used to run periodic dances. There was no more lease. He'd run a single event, but then that closed, and B.A. Dario bought the building and tore it down. So that was the end of that. Believe it or not, we got in the radio business. WKFD in Wickford. Do you remember that station at all, you guys? WKFD, 1370 on the dial, AM, 500-watt station. My father was running it, and I was working there as a sales person, selling airtime. And I had just started the band and raising a family. I had 1 kid, 2 kids. I wound up with 4 kids, but I worked every Monday night and worked days. And then I wound up working when my 4th child was born. I was working at the El Morocco, playing shows, 2 shows a night.
And Bovies has certainly become the institution in Providence or in New England.
That just turned out to be had a life of its own. The band took on a whole identity of its own. It was like 2 lives. I was Duke Belaire, and then I was somebody else, But from that, though, I opened a liquor store. After they sold it, my father died at that time, 57 years old, and my uncle and myself, and we had some people in the radio business working to run the station, but I couldn't run it by myself. It was too tough a business, and we're trying to raise the wattage to get a better coverage, but it was difficult. Sold the radio station, and my uncle handed me some money, and I opened up a liquor store in Garden City in 1969. I bought a liquor license, Class A, regular retail package store, and I went to the Garden City people and asked them if they let me put a liquor store in Garden. I'd lease a store. They had never had a liquor store in Garden City, and they said okay. It's a 15-year lease. I opened up a liquor store. I knew nothing about the business, but I learned fast, let me tell you. And I was there for 14 years in the liquor business. So, but in the meantime, I played every single Monday night.
What do you think the secret or the success was of the Monday nights? What was the philosophy behind it?
Can we just bring that mic up a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Yep, there we go.
I guess, it was the stories we hear about it and, people's memories of Bovies on Monday nights was that it was just swinging all the time. And
Well,
what do you attribute, though, not only how long it lasted, but, it sounds like you had some great players,
Yeah.
and people came in, and, maybe you could just talk a little about what made it so much fun for you.
yeah, I think personally, looking back, these are things you don't plan. They just happen. Everything was really spontaneous. We didn't have many rehearsals at all, maybe 2 or 3. When Hal Crook brought in some very difficult shots, we did rehearse them in my other house. It was even bigger than this, and we had a big downstairs because there were tempo changes in the arrangements, like we did the Ellington medley. I don't know if you heard the album.
Oh, yeah.
You did. We had to rehearse things like that, but not many rehearsals at all. I think besides having great players, where we'd pass a chart out and run it down right in front of the people. And if we have a train wreck, we just keep going. We'll fix it next time. But I think the band took on a personality all of its own whereas we connected with the audience. I had the type of guys in the band that knew how to play an audience. They didn't do it planning it that way. I don't know. When they played solos, the guys were listening to the guy that's playing, and they showed exuberance, you know, and people caught on to that. And I used to watch the audience as I was playing, and I'm watching the contact between the eyes. The guys, they would get up and scat sing. People, they never heard stuff like that before. We did it for the first time, you know, and people went crazy. And between Arthur and Dick and Lou Colombo, who stayed with me for quite a while, he lives down the Cape. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Hal Crook, he was like 17, 18 years old. He was a monster player. There was so much personality in the band. It just swept the audience. And I think we never left the audience out. We always brought them in. And we didn't plan, we didn't talk about it, we just did it. And I think I would talk to the people, I would explain the arrangement a little bit, and try to let them understand. We never got too far out musically. We didn't get so that they didn't understand what we were doing. We tried to make a contact. And I think that's what the trick was. And the audience just loved it. And we had to play certain arrangements. You know, it's like stars have their big hits. We had our own hits at Bovie's. You know, like, I don't remember what the first one was. It might have been the theme from Rocky, Saturday in the Park, but a hip arrangement on it. Things like that. They weren't just a rock and roll style. They were done over a little bit. And then, of course, playing a lot of the Ellington things. And Arthur and Dick, they were really the key to the whole thing because they played so great. And they didn't just play one chorus. They kept playing until the people were screaming, you know. And I think that's what did it. We tried to incorporate the audience all the time.
Were there
Half the band was from Boston. Yeah.
So they came down.
Yeah, local, and you know, there's some resentment with some of the local guys that I didn't use them, but you know, I used what I thought could cut the book, you know, and I didn't make many mistakes. Yeah.
Any
We had Clark Terry, and we had Zoot Sims. A couple of guys out of the Woody Herman band play with us. Whenever, in those days, the musical tent, around, theater in the round, whenever, like Sinatra or whoever, they would bring their own band. Some of the guys that worked with me played the tent, and they would rush down to Bovie's as soon as they got through. They maybe sent a sub until maybe to play the first set, but they brought a lot of guys down, and then we became known to the traveling guys. And whenever they were in town, they were at Bovie's on a Monday night, sitting in with us. Guys from Jerry Lewis's band, the drummer, and a couple of their horn players, they always came down and sat in. The drummer I got friendly with, his name was Chaz. It got to the point where he knew a couple of the charts in the book so well that when Chaz came in, he said, play that chart that I played last time. I liked it. You know, he knew what he wanted to hear and play because he was familiar with it. And Al Klink, who was on the original Glenn Miller band, he came in one night and couldn't believe it. And some of the lead trumpet players, and they'd come down to Bowie's and sit in with. We became known to all the guys out of New York and even California. Yeah.
Well, there probably wasn't another, Monday night like that anywhere.
No, there wasn't. The only competition we had was Thad Jones, Mel Lewis in New York. You know, and I think we had more fun than those guys did because was like a local thing, you know.
Yeah.
And it was. There wasn't even anything in Boston that could. Those guys from Boston wanted to come to Providence.
Yeah.
You know, I had the best players in Boston. Playing
Yeah. Yeah.
in the band.
Yeah.
Well, that's mostly the guys that were with me
The
at
original
Bovie's.
guys?
Oh yeah, it was Dick Johnson was there, George Masso, Mike Renzi, the original piano player. Of course, he's in New York now, and you know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Who else was there? Well, the whole trumpet section was with me at Bovie's. All the same guys, really. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that? How did that feel having everybody back?
Oh, it felt wonderful. Oh yeah. I mean, I wanted to play, but I couldn't. I couldn't even get up on a bandstand. You know. I had planned to play, but I wasn't well enough to do it.
Mm.
But it was good having them. Let me tell you. Yeah.
Anything else you want to share with us about?
Well, you know, I wish I had some funny stories, but I'm not the funny storyteller. But there were some guys in the band that had some funny stories, and you know, that's another thing. That's an art in itself. There was some guys that could tell stories, man, that just crack you up, you know. And I was always one of the listeners, but it's too bad. But some of them are dead now. Sorry to say.
What about the Hat Check Girl at the Celebrity Club?
Oh, I could talk about her.
Do you remember her?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
I think we met her.
Yeah, we met her over at the.
Was it Kitty? Where'd you meet her?
She was over at Ed Coates does
Kathy,
some.
Kathy.
Yeah, what's her last name? I can't remember. But she's a hot ticket.
They used to call her Kitty, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Kathy?
I think her name was Kathy. I don't remember the last name.
There was two hat check girls.
Yeah.
One of them,
She said she was married to the bouncer.
well, I better not say. No, I'm not going to say that because Paul's sons are living. No, I don't want to say that. No,
Oh, come on.
you know.
They'll die someday.
Yeah, right. Well, one of them was Paul's girl, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But one of them married, in fact, the guy just died. It was in the paper. One of them married Freddie Gizzo. Freddie Gizzo had Gizzo Tobacco. Yeah. He was a millionaire,
Oh yeah.
and he just died. And where did you meet this woman?
We met her at the Cape Verdean Club in East Providence. We were.
Oh
They
yeah,
had a videotape it was like a rhythm and blues type show.
yeah.
And the guy running the show mentioned to the audience that there are a couple of guys here doing a movie about the Celebrity Club. Anybody in the audience that's been there would like to talk to them. So we interviewed her, actually.
And she was the hat check girl.
She
Yeah,
said she was the
yeah.
hat check girl.
She white?
No,
No,
She was not.
no,
very light-skinned black woman.
yeah.
Oh no, this was a white girl.
Maybe
Yeah.
it was another.
No, somebody else. Yeah. I mean,
So
maybe
you
it
could
wa-
talk about her.
She didn't know me, did she?
We didn't even think to ask her about you.
Oh.
We were asking about.
But now we're going to go back.
She,
Yeah, we-
she never said anything. It's just that I thought it was funny. She said she was the hat check girl, and she has this email address that was like hotc at AOL. Or something.
Oh, really?
And she's an attractive woman who must be like 70 years old or something. I
Yeah,
was
it's very
amazed at how good
possible.
She looked for her age, but
Yeah.
um,
I probably know her if I see her, but I remember Kitty. She was white, and this other chick, she was white also. She married this guy Gizzo,
yeah.
who had a lot of money. But Kitty was
She said her
Paul's chick,
husband
really.
died back in the 80s or something.
You what?
She said her husband died in the 80s or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
But at the time she was married to the bouncer.
Bunk Burgess, the guy was the he was the greeter.
Yeah.
You know, he was like the host. It was Paul's.
Can you tell Tom about this a little bit?
Well, yeah, he's dead now.
You-
Okay. this was his name was Bunk Burgess. He was the greeter. Like when you walk in, he'll show you to your table, your reservation or whatever. And he was the nicest guy in the world. And he had a name for me because he was a lot older than I was. And he knew I was a bad boy in those days. In a sense, he'd laugh at me, you know. And he knew my father pretty well. But he was a greeter. It's too bad he's not living, but because he would have some fantastic stories because he saw everything firsthand and he dealt with the people. When they came in, he more or less turned them over to Paul because Paul was always there ready to greet people, especially if they were, no matter who they were, but if he thought they were going to spend a little money, I mean, he would make sure they got a nice table and Bunk would take them. Bunk just was the guy you go to before Paul, you know. The other guy you should interview, I think he's still living, is Paul's brother, Pete. He was the bartender. Did you ever get to him at all?
No. We've
Pete
tried.
Filippi?
I've called Victor Filippi
Victor, yeah, he's
Yeah,
another
Victor.
brother.
4 or 5 times, and
Wouldn't.
he's always got a bad cold and can't talk on the phone. It's like,
He didn't have much to do with the Celebrity Club.
but do you
I think he owned a bar in Randall Square. It was such a tough place you wouldn't even want to walk by it, never mind go in it.
Yeah.
I
And
think
he-
that was Victor. I never got to meet him very much.
Is Pete still around?
Pete's still living, I
Is
heard. Yep.
We'll have to track
I don't know
him
where he
down.
lives,
Yeah.
but he had the Downbeat Club, and I worked for Pete.
Oh.
And then I guess he closed the Downbeat Club and went to work for his brother Paul at the Celebrity Club, and he ran the bar.
Oh, okay.
So he.
Because we interviewed the Sons. And we talked
They
about
wouldn't know anything about it. I don't think they were even born
it.
then.
No, but they
They just
they
told-
might know how to get to Pete from.
Yeah, right.
They told us stories that their father told them. That's about all
Yeah.
they had, you know.
Yeah. I don't know how Pete and Paul wound up getting along. I don't know if there was any friction or what. Maybe that's why Pete doesn't come forward.
Well, I haven't talked to Pete, but Victor's the one that just won't.
Yeah,
He won't talk to me.
he won't. Yeah.
And I've heard he's kind of standoffish with a lot of people, but
Yeah.
you know.
I don't. I never really knew him.
Mhm.
I knew of him, but
And one guy said, "Well, there may have been some mob money, so he doesn't want to talk to anybody." You know, so I don't know.
I don't think so. No, I don't think there was any mob
You
money.
got any mob stories you want to put on tape?
No. I grew up with all those guys. I knew them all very well. Believe me. No, I wouldn't. No, I don't talk about those guys.
You're a smart man, dude. Can you? I mean, all these musicians.
Well, you know, to get into the nitty gritty of what you're saying, let's clarify something. There's a lot of good players in Rhode Island, in Providence, but they're not any better or any more unusual than some of the great players out of Boston or New York. Providence has really no distinction that's different than, let's say, guys from Boston. We had our great players. I mean, Paul Gonzalez was a great tenor player, but so was Ben Webster, and so was Coleman Hawkins, and so was Zoot Sims, and so was Al Cohn, and so Jerry Mulligan. They were from other cities, so there's nothing exclusive there. You hear a lot of non-musicians say, we had the greatest musicians in Rhode Island. Well, I like to brag like that, but they really weren't any different than other jazz players. But we did have a bunch of good ones. Now, Bobby Hackett was probably one of the greatest trumpet players that ever lived. But so was Bix Beiderbecke. So was Louis Armstrong. So was Dizzy Gillespie. So was, you want me to go on, Miles. One's from St. Louis, one's from Chicago, one's from New York. So we don't have an exclusive. That's a misnomer. We had our share of good players for a small town, and Providence was not a big city. So we did have our share of good players. But for every good player, we had a dozen who just played mediocre, I'm not putting, this is not as a put down. It's a fact. And it's something that let's stop saying we had this, this, and this, whereas other cities didn't. They all had it. You know, maybe Davenport, Iowa didn't have as many. They had Bix, and that's all. You know, other than that. Chicago had its share of great players. You want to start naming the guys who came out of Chicago? My God. You know, we have our good players. There's no difference in the style. We had some great Dixieland players. But, you know, what was Dixieland? It was a spin-off of Louis Armstrong and Baby Dodds and all those guys. It was a white rendition of New Orleans style. And we had some great players. Tony Tomaso's Jewels of Dixie, they were great. Art Pelosi and his group, you know, my band, John Allmark's band, we didn't have any exclusive. I think what we did have was guys took advantage of their talent and showed it. In other words, there was no shortage of guys that wanted to play. So maybe that made it sound like we had an unusual amount of great players. It's just that guys like to play, and you know, we had dance bands when there were supposed to be dance bands, you know. We had jam sessions when there were supposed to be jam sessions. You don't have them anymore. That's the sad part. You know, Sunday afternoon, there was 3 or 4 jam sessions. You could go sit in different places. There was a lot of bands rehearsing, and you could learn how to play, you know. There's no venues where you can go learn how to play now. Guys can't play off each other. And that's how good players started to happen. Sure. But that happened in New York, too, in Chicago, New Orleans. So I don't think the style of jazz was any different. They followed the same styles as I grew up. I went to a record store when I was 15 and bought Dizzy Gillespie. My father got mad and made me go back and get a Duke Ellington because that was his era, you know. So I'm listening to Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, Tommy Dorsey, and Woody Herman. But I also wanted to hear Diz and Parker. And my father would say, I don't like him. I like Sarah Vaughan. I don't like Sarah Vaughan. I like Ella Fitzgerald. So we go back and forth. On a Sunday, the guys would come over to my father's house, the bands, and get paid. You know, my father would have the payroll. And they'd sit there and put on Artie Shaw and Benny Goodman and argue who's the best. You know, and I'm listening to these guys talking. So meanwhile, I want to play somebody else because I'm growing up in a different era. So it's only a natural evolution. You train your ears to listen to certain things. But the only thing I'm grateful for is listening to my father. I appreciate Goodman, Shaw, and those guys. Whereas I didn't grow up just with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. I had a chance to listen to everything. So I think that benefited me a lot in my playing because I had some roots, you know. A lot of guys don't have any roots, listening roots. And let's face it, you can't start up here and start playing great. You got to start back here and develop your own style, but have your roots. And then what comes out will be you. You don't have to play note for note, but you got to listen to how they treat certain things and evolve into your own style of playing. But when you listen to great jazz players, you always hear some roots. You either hear he was influenced by Diz, Louis, in little inflections here and there, or the way Bill Evans played changes, and you say, wow. And then Horace Silver, the way he played blues, you know, you learn. And all of a sudden, you're a great jazz player because you listen to somebody. But it comes out you in the end. If it never comes out you, then you'll never really be a great jazz player. Because if you've got to explain jazz to somebody, it's almost an impossibility. Jazz is something that a person feels from within. And what comes out of the way he plays, it's an interpretation. The only thing you can teach a person that's not a musician is how to recognize when a guy is jiving you or really playing. And because there are a lot of jive players that play a lot of notes, but they go nowhere. You know, there's no structure, there's no beginning and end, there's no climax, there's no nothing. It's just a lot of notes, a lot of technique. Doesn't mean shit. Whereas a guy can play very simply, like Bobby Hackett. But wow, when he plays a note, it fits. It means something. It has warmth. It's within the chord structure, or he's making his own chord structure, but it's correct. And that's what made Miles so great. That's what made Dizzy so great. He was playing things that those other guys weren't playing. He was going off on a different, you know, he invented things like the flatted fifth, which is so simple today. But in those days, you never heard it, you know. And all of a sudden, wow, they used to laugh at Charlie Parker. Because who were we listening to? We were listening to guys playing technical stuff. All of a sudden, Parker came in and, whoa, you know, this is something else. And when people don't understand something, they have a tendency to reject it. And then 20, 30 years later, they say, wow, now I know what he was doing. And there isn't a jazz player alive today worth his salt that has not taken something from Charlie Parker. And that's a compliment to Charlie Parker, you know. That's all that means. But the only way you can play is by listening to those people and then developing your own style. And I think a lot of guys in Rhode Island listened and became decent jazz players. And that's why a lot of people think we had an exclusive. We didn't really have an exclusive on anything, you know. Boston had its great share of... and I'm not saying I could not have had the band that I had by using only locals. I went to Boston. My father went to Boston. Maybe that's where I got it from. I don't know. But a lot of his guys were from Boston. But I don't see that as a problem because if you feel as though you want a certain 2 or 3 guys to play in your band that are going to do what you want them to do, you should have a right to do that. They don't have to be local. Naturally, I built the band locally, and that's what the intention was. But if I had to go outside the local, well, so be it. You know.
Well, you're right. You did a great job.
Yeah, I'm proud of what I did in the sense, it was not planned. It's just something that happened, and I get some great memories. Yeah.
And are you happy that it's still continuing with John Elmark? And
Oh yeah. I'm happy. I'm not envious in any way. I'm very happy for John. I've gone down there. John and I are very good. John played for me. I got pictures of him in that book with my band. He was a young kid, you know. He is a marvelous player. He writes marvelous. I don't write like he does. He can write. I can't arrange like him. He's got a lot of talent. So I'm glad in the sense that's carrying on with a big band, which means the music won't die. If that should give up tomorrow, eventually people will forget about big bands. They'll go and listen to a mediocre dance band and think that's what the big band music is all about, when it really isn't. Because Allmark is what it's all about. What I did was it was all about. The dance band was an offshoot. Well, I should put it just the opposite. I mean, everything was a dance band in the beginning, and within those bands, jazz evolved, and they played as much as they could, but they still had to cater to the dancers, because that's what you played, venues. Everything was dances. But when those bands were on the road, we played clubs or places where you could let loose a little bit. It wasn't so much dancers. We played more jazz.
right.
It depends where you are, you know. So, tough to explain, but
Well, you did a good job. I think you
Yeah.
did a great job. Anything else you can think of and we missed or anything?
The end of this tape.
That was excellent, Duke. I think
I don't know if it's who it's worth, what it's worth to who. I don't know, but
Well, like I said, I mean, there's some stuff here that I think, well, maybe I didn't say this, but Tom was saying that there's stuff here that'll be useful, I think, in the film. And
yeah, I guess if you're interested in what we're talking about,
Yeah.
what I'm saying